move out of the victim mindset, how to effectively step back into the driver's seat of our life, how to take back control of what was ours all along that maybe we relinquished our hold of over time. And so, man, I'm excited for this conversation. I was thinking about it just before we hopped on here of just what do I want to discuss with you? Because last night I talked about something very, very relevant, and we ended up having really good conversations in the chat. And we've been going through A Course in Miracles ever since January. There have been a couple of days, and I think probably totaling maybe 2 weeks out of the full year so far that we've missed. And so I want to be incorporating that back in, but I also want to be talking about just the relevant, timely things that I'm learning along the way, conversations we're having together, and bringing those back full circle to the shows, just so that the show feels so relevant, while also being guided by this daily lesson that we read together. So as I was thinking about tonight's lesson and just what was it very much so in real time for me, I was like, well, let me just go take a look at A Course in Miracles. And sure enough, the review lesson that we're looking at today is so applicable to this conversation around victimhood. Y'all, it's wild how easy it is to exist in that state, to look around and blame everybody around us and effectively have a reason for why our life is not going the way that it is. And there's many different ways blame can manifest, or even victimhood can manifest. I think it's probably more appropriate to say there's many ways victimhood can manifest, and blame perhaps is one of those. But there's also an element of living in almost like surrender. Like I'm done. I quit. I've given up. And to be able to just surrender to the fact that life happens to us and we have hardly any control. And there's an element of that is very real. And then even the element of blame, there's some truth there. Somebody did something, and thus we find ourselves here in this position. So what and how do we actually move out of victimhood to allow for us to start really taking onus and ownership for our lives and for ourselves in a way that accounts for the reality that we are not fully in control? What does that look like, and how do we move into that position? And so that's the subject matter for this evening. Just jumping in here in the chat before we keep going. Stephen, I'm glad you're here. Good to see you. X-Crix, hello. Thanks for joining. Raul Ravi, thanks for joining us tonight. Y'all, I'm really excited about this conversation because this switch from being the victim to being in the driver's seat of my life was the number one most impactful thing that I've ever experienced in my life. And it was hard. It was a really, really hard shift to do. So what I kind of want to start with the premise of what my personal experience was with this tonight, and then just have it be open for conversation. So my dear friend and I were chatting, and we were just recognizing that there are moments in our personal lives where we will not even be aware of our, I guess you could even say, personhood in an environment. Our goal is to just keep peace. Our goal is to just keep people happy, just kind of keep things moving. And I've seen this a lot with mothers who stay at home, or maybe they are working, but when they're at home with their children, their job is to facilitate a peaceful environment. And they if you ask them, what are your dreams? What are your goals? What do you want in life? They actually really don't have an answer to that. So we can see it with the mother. We also can see it with the father role, the role of the provider, where he actually can lose himself and really go into this role of the only reason why I exist is for the sake of the children and for the sake of providing for the family. So for the mother, she loses herself in the nurturing. For the father, he loses himself in the provider role. And then by proxy, there's no real person who's actually taking charge and leading and being a full functioning, full-fledged human. I had this thought, I guess a year ago, where I realized, man, the linear progression in Western society, just from what I've been observing, and of course there's so much nuance here, what I've been observing is that you have young people who it's all about them when they're little. And then, man, they graduate high school and they're at the, like, that's their peak. They love their high school, or maybe their peak is college. Maybe they hate both and they're just excited to get free, but they are peaking. And with education, as well as just the way that our culture has been set up, there's this fixation around being in your early 20s, and this is the life of the party, and this is freedom, and this is as good as it gets. And then actually, as you progress older, there's just a negative connotation to it. So we're looking at the linear trajectory, let's say within an 80-year time frame. So you've got the kid who is figuring out life, peaks in somewhere between high school, end of college. And then, man, once they graduate, enter the workforce, they realize, man, I know nothing. And then by the time they hit 30, they're like, okay, I'm slowly starting to figure things out. But then right when they kind of are slowly starting to figure things out, they realize what they're called to do. They realize even what they're good at. Then they decide, I'm going to settle down and get married. And so let's say 35 years old, they do that. So they've had a decent run between 30 and 35 of making progress, having some real success in business or impact in community, maybe philanthropy. And then 35, they settle down to have kids. Well, now that role of losing oneself in the provider, losing oneself in the nurturer kicks in. So now we've got where there's really only been real progress in that 5-year gap between figuring it out after 20 plus years of kind of floundering about, or I guess 30 plus years of floundering about. And then they make some real impact in community, in the workforce, and innovation, art, education. And then they go and settle down and lose themselves. So they only made that kind of progress. And then they dive into their family and into their children, investing, which is a beautiful and good thing to an extent. And then the cycle starts all over again. And then maybe they have 15, 20 years at the end of their life. So we see society growing in very minute increments because there's not a through line of a healthy, whole individual knowing how to love and receive, how to give and receive, how to love in and invest in other people as well as themselves, so that from their fullness, the overflow of that is giving to a society around them. I was at dinner tonight and we were speaking with, there were two individuals holding two very different perspectives. One person was saying, I want to be giving and living a life of giving by the time I asked everybody this question. I said, who do you want to be in 10 years? What do you want to have happened in your life? And one person said, I really want to be living a life of service where I'm just giving. When I'm 51, I want to be giving at that time. And he was challenged by a woman that said, well, I believe that, we're all kind of connected in some way. Let's say we are that splinter of the divine and we're all connected. We're all made in the image of God. And therefore we are as successful as our brother around us. She said, so wouldn't it actually make sense that by you investing in yourself to be the best possible version of yourself, you are effectively then giving to the community around you? I was like, that's a very solid argument. And then he said, yes, and you could literally say the same, but that by way of investing in others, you're investing in yourself if we are indeed connected. So two completely different viewpoints, but both having a similar outcome by way of kind of cultivating the sum of the whole, bettering the sum of the whole. And so as we're looking at this linear trajectory of literally age and like the incremental growth of society and the family community at large, it's so interesting because as we're having this conversation around, well, how do we stop feeling like a victim? It's really important that we identify, well, when do we start feeling the victim? And as we're looking at this kind of, let's say 50 to 60 year timeline of our lives, wherever you may fall in that, we at many different stages of those 60 years can fall prey to being a victim for many different reasons. And so a lot of people will fall into the victim mindset when they are processing in their 20s how they were raised and understanding, oh, well, I want to understand who I am. Well, let me understand why I am that way. And then in that process of looking back, it's actually really easy to have blame come up, have anger come up. So we were talking at the beginning of the show about how victimhood can manifest. And one is blame. Another is actually taking a very lackadaisical kind of a surrendered posture to life of like, well, I have zero control. What's the point anyways? Another one is just, you're angry. You're just kind of negative and angry. And you're pessimistic in terms of looking at the world. And there's many other forms that it manifests. But until we come to the point where we can identify how victimhood shows up in our lives, and usually it's the one of those three examples is a mirror for us of how we act as the victim. But man, once we can understand, man, I show up as a victim in this way, and I know why I do. I understand how maybe how I was raised really positioned me to view the world a certain way. I understand how that death caused me to be fearful of loving anybody, and how I can actually be a victim to this heartbreak that I had, or this devastation of loss or death, or what, you name it, whatever happened. I understand how that impacted me. Understanding the impact of how we actually came to even arrive at this place of victimhood is so important, because now we have the ability to actually have empathy with ourselves for what happened in the past. If we do not ever come to the place of empathy in order to sit with our own experience, we actually cannot get to the point of real change. Because if we're feeling like a victim, that usually means our nervous system is not regulated around what happened. That anger or that blame or that even just apathy towards life, all of those are not the right emotions necessary. They're not actually the emotions that allow for real change to come about. And so, and I want to give you just a quick example by Hawkins. He wrote this book called Letting Go. And he gave this visual graph of an emotion. There was, let's say a dozen emotions that align with different numerical values. So you've got shame at level 20. You've got guilt at 50. You've got pride at 150. Then you have courage at 200. Then you have, I think, love at 400 or 600, and then you've got peace. And so all of a sudden you start understanding, okay, we need to get to a certain emotional level in order to start producing real change in our lives. And if we are at the emotional level of grief or shame over the things in the past or the things that we haven't yet to process, and there's just real deep hurt, and it could just be real pain, it could be anger that we feel about the past, the things that have happened to us that have gotten us to this place of victimhood today. If we have yet to work through those emotions, it's highly unlikely that we're actually going to be able to see new emotions take their place. There's this concept that emotions are like a tunnel, and we have to move through the emotion to get to the other side. So part of what keeps us stuck in victimhood is the inability to actually process the emotion necessary to get us out of it. And once we do, once we start giving ourselves empathy to then feel the pain that we need to, we then can start to get to the other side of it. And then think, okay, how do I want to be? How do I actually want to change? How do I want life to look outside of this? And asking that question, do I want to stay in this place, is so important. So a few questions, to kind of get us out of this victim mindset is, well, do we know what got us here in the first place? That's number one. Number two, do we know what we would want it to look like? What would replace that victim mindset? And it might be the anger, it might be the blame, it might be that kind of apathy to life, but what would the alternative look like? And so one, starting with, how did I get here? Two, what would it look like for me to have real change? What do I want? What's the new ideal, the new target? And then third, what is actually, if I was to reverse engineer, so I'm starting where I am today, I know how I got here. Now I know where I want to get to. How do I actually reverse engineer my ideal into real habits or practices or just things that I can do in my normal day-to-day life that will allow for me to kind of gradually become this new person? We think about the butterfly and I just love this example because I never knew this up until a couple years ago. When a caterpillar goes into its cocoon, it actually dissolves. It literally is like mush. And so this concept of from death to life is a very real thing. And there's some parts of us that need to die sometimes, but within the confines of this is why I said we need to have empathy with ourselves, which I know is kind of a weird way to say it. We need to have empathy with ourselves, because if we were to go back and sit in the shoes of that 20-year-old or that 7-year-old or that 15-year-old or 30-year-old even, who made a bad choice or went through that amount of pain, and we were to really sit with ourselves in that moment. And better yet, and my friend actually had me do this exercise. He was like, I want you to look at, I actually saw a picture that made me really upset from a few years ago when I was in my 20s. And I was just so harsh with my younger self. And I was like, man, I was so naive, so stupid. How could I let the wool be pulled over my eyes like that? And they were like, I want you to think of somebody else that age. And with this little exercise, my sister was the age that I was in that photo at that time. So I think I was 24 years old in that photo. My sister was 24 years old at that time. And he was like, I want you to think about your little sister going through exactly what you went through. And as I started thinking about it, I just felt so proud of my sister, pretending she was in the same experience that I was. And then I went and I put myself back in that experience. And it was just a transformation of how I viewed myself and the circumstances in that moment. And the reason why empathy, again, it's so important is because if we're stuck in shaming ourselves, our body actually needs to this is why on the Knowing Show, we talk about physical intelligence. Our body keeps the score. Our body remembers. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Our body remembers and our body stores data. And so if our nervous system is activated and upset about what happened before, and we have yet to experience it, we have yet to go through it, we have yet to feel the sorrow or the pain or even knowing the shame. Knowing the shame and feeling it allows for us to actually move out of it. But if we're meeting shame with empathy, the shame actually really can't exist. The truth coupled with empathy shines a spotlight on shame, and it brings it to the light, and it exposes how hurtful it is and how damaging it is. And now we actually can go back and sit in those experiences and start to heal them. And then after we do, that second step, which is, okay, well, how would I want to change? What's the new way that I want to exist in the world? And then we can create the action plan to get us there. I just want to jump here in the chat. Good evening. Thank you guys so much for joining, or good afternoon for those of you who are joining from different parts of the world. Roland, thank you. Thank you so much. I got these for my birthday. Pure Moto, hello. Good to see you, Fran. Thank you for joining, West. Yamiz, hello. Rogelio, hello from Dallas, Texas. I'm so glad you're here. Brian, my friend, our wonderful moderator. Thank you so much for joining. Tunit, hello. Good to see you. Asfak, hello. Slate. Vietman, hello. He says, why is your face shiny? Probably because it's a mix of highlighter that I put on my cheeks, but then also I was out walking. I probably got a little sweaty. Need to go wash my face after. Perry, hello. Pedro, good to see you. Chicken tonight, hello. Ty or Teo, hello. Paxton, I'm so glad to see you, my friend. Christy, hello. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. Blake, wow, says, I want to be happy in life. I have had so many struggles from being type 1 diabetic for 38 years now. So just to be upright and breathing at 43 is a beautiful thing. Wow. Man. All right, Blake, I feel like you've got a lot you could probably teach us tonight. I would love to hear, how do you not live as a victim? That's the conversation for tonight, is how do we exist in whatever struggle that we're in, and how do we live walking in even the fullest potential. And the fullest potential is going to be different from each one of us, for each one of us. And that's actually probably one of the most important things, y'all, is that so let's talk about step 2. We talked about how to stop feeling like we're the victim. Number 1 is we have to understand how we got to this point and extend compassion. and empathy, and allow for the truth to come out, but be met with compassion. And compassion is basically empathy in action. So which leads to step 2. So step 1, how did I get here? Really understanding that, meeting it with compassion. Step 2, what even is my ideal? So to this point, it's so important that when we're trying to identify a new target, like a new way of being, it's not just, well, I want to stop doing that. I want to stop being angry. I want to stop being in pain. I want to stop X, Y, or Z. But we actually need to identify, well, what's the alternative? Because what we'll probably end up doing if we don't set a new target, we'll end up doing a 360 repetition of history rather than a lateral 180 change. So we have to understand what is the new ideal. And so this is where, Blake, we all have very different potentials, and we all have a very different standard of what dictates success for me versus you, because we're coming from completely different life experiences. We're born into different families. We receive different parents. We grew up in different economic statuses and growing up in different communities and cultures and different environments. We all are so different. And so if I am measuring my potential by anybody else other than who I was created to be, but before the beginning of time, I am inevitably going to have, as Theodore Roosevelt said, have comparison, which is the thief of joy. And I'm also most likely actually not going to be able to walk in my fullest potential because I'm not going to have a realistic view of what is my potential. And the reality is also, we might very well have a lower standard for ourselves if we're measuring it by somebody else. Because I believe this. I believe every single one of us has, like, us being in our power and us being in the potential of who we were created to be is a powerful and beautiful thing. Even if you were born on the streets, actually, any kind of transformation might even make your story way more powerful. Even if you become, anything, maybe you just stop living on the streets, and maybe that's the transformation, and that's incredible. Maybe you were born into the wealthiest family, and you are able to make like colossal global change. That's so important. It's all about you and me versus ourselves, and where we're not creating our ideal based off of other people's standards for our lives, but rather we're actually looking vertically and considering, who was I created to be? What is the best potential, greatest potential that I know can come about from where I am and who I am? So I'd love to hear that, Blake, if you don't mind, if you're still with us tonight. I'm just scrolling down in the chat because I would love to hear, and for anybody else, I'd love to hear, how do you guys basically prevent victimhood, a victim mindset? How do we protect ourselves from living as a victim? Just looking through here in the chat. Wasp Cause says, my nervous system is always activated. It's interesting. I had a therapist, actually. He was on the Knowing Show a bit ago. I should have him back on, but he said that, our nervous system is not able to regulate. We can't learn something new until our nervous system is regulated. So to this point about getting our nervous system to a point that is actually experiencing peace, that's why compassion is really important. Because if we're constantly shaming ourselves so that every time the emotion is popping up and it's pain or anger or just depression or grief, and then we shame it and we silence it, well, then our nervous system is constantly like this trigger where we're constantly getting triggered from the outside, but we don't have the ability to soothe it and actually heal from it. So it just stays suppressed. And then occasionally it ruptures like a geyser and it just explodes, and we explode. We scare everybody around us, and everyone's like, man, I got to walk on eggshells around you. But it's because we haven't tended to the root issue of what's going on deep inside us. So us being able to get to the point of sitting with grief or sitting with pain or sitting with whatever happened that positioned us to feel like a victim in the first place, that ability actually helps to calm our nervous system. And honestly, it's almost like, not, since it is so physiological, our nervous system, there's some real practical things that we can do to just literally self-regulate. I was with a little boy this evening. He's the most adorable. He's 3 years old and just has the cutest dimples in his cheeks. And he was really upset at dinner. And there was 2 things that happened that I thought was brilliant. His mom helped him to just take some deep breaths, because actually when we get stressed or anxious, our nervous system activates. Our shortness of breath, even in crying, can actually cut off our oxygen to the part of our brain that's our short-term memory. So we get really activated really fast. We feel trapped. We just are flooded. And so the deep breathing kind of helps send and regulate the oxygen to the brain. So it's really important that we actually have deep breathing. So that's number one. Another thing that she did that I thought was so brilliant, she just moved him out of that environment. We were all at a restaurant and she took him outside, and he could not stop crying for about 25 minutes. And he wasn't loud, but they were just trying to let him process it. And they took him out of the restaurant. Within 3 minutes, she came back around and he was totally fine. So the changing of environments when he was upset was so helpful, in addition to her encouraging him with the deep breathing. So those are just 2 small ways to kind of help regulate the nervous system. And then once we do that, then we can start introducing time for change, like new ways of being, new ways of existing. But man, if our nervous system is always in fight, flight, freeze mode, it's going to be so hard to allow for us to have any real change that moves us out of the victim mindset. So Wasquaz, I thought that was such a good, comment. Thank you for that. Just scrolling. For those of you who are wondering, this is sparkling water. The Waking Man, hello. Good to see you. Surrender, hello. Thank you for joining. Alboom, hello. Geomani, hello. Christian. Hugh Jewel, hello. Adele, thanks for joining. Sergio. Just scrolling down. Sergio, I just saw your joke. That was funny. Scrolling. All right, Keshav, Mick, hello. Caribbean Heat. Have to live in reality. Comparing real life examples is the only way to have realistic goals. That's so good. I really like that comment. Isn't that so true? And honestly, existing with social media as one of our benchmarks for reality is so dangerous, because we're just seeing the 2%, 5% of someone's life. That's so good. Vade Retro, hello from Scotland. Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you're here. Zach Morse, hello. Captain, good to see you. Joseph, good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Connie Brown, oh, my friend, be grateful on LinkedIn. Connie, I was thinking of you last week. Oh my gosh, I was thinking of you last week and I was like, I don't think I ever followed up with her. So I'm so sorry if you're still here. I'm so sorry I did not follow up with you. I would love to have a phone chat and catch up. So I'm just so glad to see your note. But she said, be grateful. Man, I just got chills. Y'all, that is one of the best and most fast and expedient ways to get us out of a victim mindset is gratitude. Yesterday, we talked about gratitude actually being the antidote to pride. Well, goodness is gratitude an antidote to victimhood. There are so many endless reasons for gratitude, to the fact that we're breathing, the fact that I even have sparkling water here. What a blessing. How refreshing. To the fact that we all get to be here on the show, that we have the technology to have this conversation, for every single person that's here in the chat that's really being encouraging. For every sunrise, there is just endless reasons to be grateful. And then layer in friends, family, a job. Even if you're in between jobs right now, the fact you have had the ability to work. So, man, I'm just so grateful, Connie. I'm so grateful. I love this. She says, when we practice gratitude, it helps. When I focus on what I focus on expands. So if I focus on my blessings, more blessings come. I love that. It reminds me of this concept: where you place your attention is where you place your energy. I love this. Man, I might even love this more. What I focus on expands. It's like our attention going to one place, that it gets bigger because we're actually putting our focus on there. I love this concept of a horse with blinders on. And man, if we're focusing our attention, we're moving off of the things that are causing us to live as a victim. We're moving it towards our ideal. And then in terms of what are those habits and practices? So I actually think that Connie just really helped us with that third thing, that third step. So the first step to how to move from being a victim to living into our fullest potential, is, okay, well, how did I get here? That's step one, identifying how we came here, addressing it with compassion. And then compassion, which is empathy in action, actually moves us into the second step, which is creating our own ideal. And it's you versus you and me versus me. It's not compared to anybody else. It's me looking vertically, considering, who was I created to be? What is my greatest potential? What would it look like if I was to actually do that? And then that moves us into the third step, which is actually creating a trajectory. How do I move from my current state to my ideal? And it's like reverse engineer. Who do I need to become to be that ideal? And then what practices do I need to put in place? And Connie, I just love this gratitude. So good. Chills all over. 363 English. I'm glad you're here, my friend. SG, hello. I love this. Mace Life Catalyst says, if you want to get over being a victim, get over any trauma and control your nervous system, try Mace Energy Method. I will look into that, Mace. I'm assuming it's yours if it's Mace is in your handle and it's the Mace Energy Method. That's so cool. Am, hello. Thank you. I'm glad. I hope that that's okay. Image Elohim, hello. Good to see you. Samuel, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Vade, Anthony, hello. Hello. Glenn. Wayne, I'm glad to see you. I hope you're doing so well. I hope you had a good day. Wasquas, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Jay Chris, hello. Good to see you. 363 English, there should only be one chat. He said, Brian, is there two chats? There should only be one. Sebastian, hello. 363 says, work is not a blessing to me. Yeah, and then he said, if you didn't work, it would be different. That's a great, see, Brian, I love that. That's totally turning it around. That's so good. That's also a definition of depression. What we focus on expands in a negative way. Things that are usually small expand to overwhelming, Vade says. Man, that is so true. Y'all, isn't that so interesting? The very principles that can guide us onto and into our own ideal can sometimes actually be the very things that lead us down a destructive path. Man, that's so good. Hamid, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Y'all, thank you for joining tonight. I really, really loved this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and read the Course in Miracles lesson for today. It so perfectly applied with what we're talking about. This is a review. Lesson 196. It can be, but myself I crucify. All that I do unto myself. If I attack, I suffer. But if I forgive, salvation will be given me. It is so almost comical that what we put out is so often what we receive. It's like a water wheel effect. And what comes in comes out. It goes both ways. Like what we give out is what we'll end up receiving from other people. And then what we fill ourselves up with will be the thing that comes out of us. You shall know a tree by its fruit. So what's inside of us and then the quality of our output usually is an indicator of the quality of our input and vice versa. And law of attraction. What am I giving out that will then come back to me? So it's, where are we going to break the cycle? Are we going to break the cycle with our inputs, with what we're consuming? Are we going to break the cycle with new habits that we're going to put into our lives and really allow for change to break that victim mindset? If I attack, I suffer. If I am fixating, putting my attention and my energy on attacking people, on all of the ways that things have not been just, all of the ways in which I'm a victim. We are suffering. I'm putting my attention on that which is causing me pain, rather than putting my attention on that which is life-giving, which will bring me freedom. And there is freedom in the truth. There is freedom in love. There is freedom in real change. So maybe this is just the question for all of us as we kind of have our takeaway tonight is, as we were talking about it with the caterpillar, the metamorphosis process includes a disillusionment of the entire carcass of the caterpillar. If you were to open a cocoon, you would not see a caterpillar there. So what in our lives actually needs to become completely disillusioned in order for real transformation to take place? And sometimes that disillusionment may actually be the letting go of those old stories that have held us into this victim mindset, but it's also the thing that has given us our identity. And that is terrifying. Yet, what could take its place? This is why we have to have something new. We have to have a new ideal. It's not enough to just say, I want to stop being this way. Well, talk about our nervous system being upset. That's not a real solution. That actually is potentially giving more cause for anxiety because our nervous system operates within the confines of very primal survival, and it has survived within the confines of victimhood. So we have to introduce a new way of being before we can really start to undo the old. It's okay, well, where am I going to go? What's the alternative, rather than just blindly stumbling through life, because that's very terrifying. Just jumping here in the chat one last time. Bob, I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry, we're just jumping off. Wasquaw says, what are your feelings on using psychedelics to heal? I have heard so many different mixed reviews. And you know what? I actually hold an opinion that I'm a loose opinion. There's this biblical text that says God created every plant to be useful. And of course, I think everything has a light and a shadow to it. Even the annoying things like spiders have a use. And I'm sure just like that, I think there can be very good plant medicines that can have a shadow to it, where maybe you overdo it or it becomes dangerous. But if it's used for healing, I think that there is something to that. And I've heard good things. But I don't know. I don't have experience with it. I will just say plant medicine, like herbal medicine. And then I think it can err into the side of psychedelics. But I just think in general, there's actually probably a lot more that we could stand to benefit if we were willing to explore what would it look like to be more plant oriented and like eating from the land. And I actually was talking with somebody the other day, and they were talking about their alkaline diet and how it healed them from arthritis. They were going to have surgery on both hands and get 2 knee replacements. And his father had died from arthritis at the age of 60. And he was able to completely heal himself by eating purely an alkaline diet. So I know that you asked me about psychedelics, and I expanded it way beyond that. A woman was cured of addiction from the medicine from a poppy seed plant, which was one of my very favorite shows. It was here with Michelle and Ratowski, I think is her last name. That was one of my favorite episodes. So I think that there's a lot for us to explore just with food. And if we would just kind of clean up what we're eating. And the other thing I will say about psychedelics, I feel like I don't know. I think I'll stop there. I'm open to it. It freaks me out a little bit, but I think we would be foolish to rule it out given how many people have really been helped by it. Kenny, hello, good to see you. Preston, good to see you. Steve, hello. J. Chris, Husafel, hello. 363 English says, don't you think it could be more terrifying if we knew our future? Probably. Yes. Oh man, probably. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you have such a wonderful night. I will see you tomorrow. I'm kind of doing this time over the next week, and then we'll be going back to the morning in the next 2 weeks. But in the meantime, we are just kind of very, very, very slowly rolling this out. This is the link to the Knowing Community. And I say very slowly because I'm actually traveling and I haven't had much time to go into the community and make comments and responses. But I'm so grateful for two of our wonderful community members who have gone in there and made some comments and added some thoughts, because I really want this community to be built for all of us and by all of us. You know, we have such good conversations here. And so if you want to go ahead and join, it's completely free. I just wanted, honestly, a way to connect with you guys beyond this, even though this is so special to me. We're going to start having our weekly trivia in the Knowing Community. We're going to start having our monthly trivia in the Knowing Community. We're going to start having Sunday calls where hopefully I can see you guys and we can actually get together and actually do real hangouts, where when I travel, we can all hang out and be around a dinner table or beyond that. So I would love to have you guys join. I'm going to be promoting this in the next couple weeks, but I wanted to get and invite the Knowing Show community on there first so that I can start really hearing your thoughts. I really, really, really want to create something that allows for us to, let's freaking change the world, which is just a crazy, crazy, audacious dream. But I really, really want that. I think that if we had emotionally healthy and healed people, I think we would live in a very different world. That is my staunch belief. I think families would stay together. Couples would, maybe they wouldn't get married so fast. And then when they do, they'll actually be able to stay together. Oh, man, I think that would just be so, so, so wonderful. So, all right, go ahead. And I saw Christy say, yes, subscribe. Subscribe to the Knowing Show. Go ahead and join the Knowing Community. I dropped the link in the chat and would love to have you guys there. Again, we're going to be launching our first Sunday here in the next couple weeks. Would love to have you. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. I will see you tomorrow evening on the Knowing Show.